Chika was the envy of every woman in the sleek glass towers of the city. She walked through the office with skin like polished mahogany and a smile so radiant it could convince a board director to sign a multi-million naira contract without reading the fine print. To the junior staff watching her from their cubicles, she had truly arrived. The primary reason for their jealousy was her boss, Mr. Chidera. In the public eye, he was a visionary leader and the manager of the year every single day. During board meetings, he presented Chika work as if it were a rare diamond, draping her in the finest Ankara blazers and providing her with the newest technology. He would stand before the company and declare her his star and his right hand, leaving other employees to hiss about her incredible luck. They compared their own mundane managers to Chidera, who seemed to treat Chika like corporate royalty. However, the moment the heavy glass door of the executive suite clicked shut, the public adoration vanished instantly. The man who praised her in front of the directors would use that same voice to roar until her ears rang over misplaced comma in a spreadsheet. He would lean over her desk, his eyes turning dark as he reminded her that she was nothing but an industry orphan he had plucked from the dust of an internship. He told her plainly that no one else would ever hire her and that if she ever dared to resign, he would use his influence to ensure her name was blacklisted from every firm in the city. He claimed she belonged to that desk until the day she entered the ground. Trapped in this golden cage, Chika would simply tremble and apologize for mistakes she hadn't even made. In this video, you will understand why you should never compromise your integrity or well-being to seize a position held by another, as the lesson from this narrative emphasizes the importance of professional contentment and discernment. While an individual's career trajectory may appear to be a sequence of fortunate events, it is often a strategic exit from a restrictive environment. If you're just tuning into this channel, please subscribe, give this video a thumbs up, and don't forget to share with your friends and family, and tell us where you're watching from in the comments section. Chika sat at her polished mahogany desk, her fingers hovering over a keyboard that felt heavier with every passing hour. The vibrant patterns of her Ankara blazer, meticulously tailored to project an image of high-heeled confidence and corporate success, seemed to mock the gray exhaustion settling deep into her bones. To anyone walking past her glass-walled office, she was the picture of the blessed woman who had reached the pinnacle of her career. They saw the expensive fabrics and the authoritative posture of an operations manager, but they could not see the golden cage she inhabited or the 20-hour workdays that had drained the light from her eyes. The true nature of her prison was the man in the corner office, Mr. Chidera. While the public and the junior staff viewed him as a charismatic man of the year and a visionary leader, Chika lived with the dark and demonic reality of his private temper. Behind the closed glass doors of the executive suite, the charismatic mask disintegrated instantly. The air in the room would grow thick and suffocating, enough to be cut with a paper cutter, as Chidera's voice transitioned from boardroom praise to a low, cutting hiss. He took a twisted pleasure in reminding her of her origins, calling her a common industry orphan, whom he had plucked from the dust of an internship. If a single comma was misplaced in a 1,000-page report, his rage would flare, and he would roar until her ears rang. He used his power to weave a narrative of her incompetence, insisting that she was nothing without his guidance and that he would erase her name from the industry if she ever dared to seek a life outside his shadow. He claimed she was his property, bound to that desk until the day she entered the ground. In the face of this verbal abuse, Chika had learned to play the part of the submissive subordinate, trembling and apologizing for imaginary failures just to survive the day. She was a professional prisoner, trapped by the fear that leaving would result in the total destruction of her reputation. She looked at her reflection in the darkened window, realizing she had become a ghost haunting her own life, a woman who looked like a queen to the world but felt like a slave in the one room that mattered. While Chika withered under the weight of her secret burdens, Rosaline moved through the office like a shark in silk, scenting blood in the water. Rosaline was not merely an ambitious junior staffer. She was a professional student of power who understood that in this firm, the way to the top was not through hard work, but through the careful grooming of a man's ego. She spent her mornings perfecting a specific look, sharp, modern corporate attire paired with gold accessories that clinked softly whenever she passed Mr. Chidera's glass office. She knew exactly which angles to take and which smiles to deploy to ensure she remained a constant pleasant flicker in the corner of his eye. Her primary weapon was the honeyed coffee ritual. While Chikadinaka was buried in the backrooms fixing the technical disasters Chitara created, Rosaline would glide into the executive suite with a steaming mug of a special blend she had curated specifically for his palate. She didn't just drop the coffee and leave. She would linger for just a few seconds too long, leaning against the doorframe to share a bit of office intelligence that always made Chitara feel like a king among peasants. She told him how the industry whispered about his brilliance and how the junior staff feared his shadow, feeding the very narcissism that was currently starving Chikadinaka of her soul. Rosaline's charms were corporate magnets designed to highlight Chikadinaka's growing failures. Every time Chikadinaka emerged from a grueling session looking exhausted and frayed, Rosaline was there, fresh, smelling of expensive lilies, and ready with a witty remark that made Chikadinaka look like a wet rag in comparison. She began to subtly plant seeds of doubt in Chitara's mind, questioning why a visionary like him was stuck with an operations manager who looked so tired and uninspired. She positioned herself as the vibrant alternative, the lioness waiting to take the place of the frightened chicken. To the rest of the office, Rosaline was just a helpful, high-achieving employee. But to those who knew the game, she was a volunteer for a mission she didn't yet realize was a trap. She was so blinded by the shimmer of the corner office that she never stopped to ask why the woman currently sitting there was praying for a way out. The afternoon sun beat against the frosted glass of the break room, but the air inside was chilled by the industrial air conditioner and a conversation that stopped Chikadinaka in her tracks. She had gone to fetch a glass of water, her head throbbing from a 3-hour session where Mr. Chitara had systematically torn apart her quarterly projections, calling her a glorified clerk who would be back on the streets of Lagos if not for his benevolence. As she reached for the door handle, she heard a high-pitched, familiar giggle that belonged to Rosaline. Through the slight gap in the door, Chikadinaka saw Rosaline leaning against the counter, her posture oozing a calculated confidence that she never showed to the senior staff. Rosaline was holding a cup of the premium coffee she had started brewing specifically for Mr. Chitara's office, the steam rising like incense. Beside her stood another junior associate, whispering in hushed, gossipy tones about the morning's shouting match in the executive suite. "Chikadinaka is finished," Rosaline said, her voice dripping with a mixture of pity and triumph. "The man is tired of her. He told me this morning that she looks at him with the eyes of a frightened chicken, and that a visionary like him deserves a lioness who can match his fire." She paused to take a sip of her coffee, a small predatory smile playing on her lips. She is a burden to him now. He only keeps her around because he likes to tell the board he is a mentor to the underprivileged. But she has no fire left. Once I step into that office, the energy will change. I will be the queen of the operations floor, and he will finally have a partner who understands his greatness. Chikadinaka stood frozen in the hallway, her hand still hovering over the cold metal handle. For years, she had viewed Rosaline's subtle sabotages and flattery as a personal attack, a threat to the career she had sacrificed her soul to build. But as she listened to Rosaline describe the throne she intended to steal, the fear that had gripped Chikadinaka for a decade began to dissolve into a strange, cold clarity. She looked at her bruised spirit and then at Rosaline's greedy, shining eyes through the glass. She realized that Rosaline didn't see the dark, demonic rages or the leather-belt cruelty of Chitara's personality. Rosaline only saw the encre blazers and the title. In that moment, Chikadinaka didn't feel anger. She felt a profound, almost spiritual sense of relief. Rosaline was not an enemy to be fought or a rival to be defeated. She was a volunteer for a suicide mission. Chikadinaka realized that she didn't need to find a way out of the glass prison anymore. She just needed to help Rosaline find the key to the cage. If Rosaline wanted to dance with the demon, Chikadinaka would be the one to provide the music. Chikadinaka arrived at the office with a newfound stillness that masked the gears turning in her mind. The decision had been made. If Rosaline wanted the throne, Chikadinaka would ensure the seat was white-hot with Chitara's fury before she handed it over. She sat at her desk and opened the master file for the upcoming quarterly merger, the very document Chitara intended to use to solidify his reputation with the board. With a steady hand and a cold heart, She moved the primary data folder into the system's trash and initiated a permanent wipe. It was her first burnt offering, a digital sacrifice to her coming freedom. The explosion happened exactly 3 hours later. Chitara buzzed her intercom, his voice already vibrating with the jagged edge of a man who lived to dominate. When she entered his office, he was staring at a blank screen, his face flushing a dangerous shade of purple. He began his usual routine, rising from his leather chair to loom over her, his mouth opening to unleash a torrent of insults about her incompetence and how he had rescued her from nothingness. But today, the script changed. Before he could finish his first sentence, Chikadanaka let out a sharp, piercing wail that echoed through the thin glass partitions and into the main floor where the entire staff sat. She didn't cower. She leaned toward the door and cried out about the technical glitch, her voice reaching a pitch that made the junior associates stand up in their cubicles. She grabbed a stack of papers and let them flutter to the floor, creating a scene of chaotic distress. Chitara froze, his hand suspended in mid-air. For the first time, he was acutely aware of the eyes watching through the glass. The manager of the year could not be seen berating a weeping woman during a technical crisis. He tried to lower his voice to a menacing whisper, but every time he stepped closer to hiss a threat, Chikadanaka moved toward the window and spoke even louder about her dedication to the firm. She was suffocating him with a public display of the very loyalty he had always demanded. Behind the feigned tears, her eyes remained dry and observant. She saw Rosaline watching from the hallway, her expression a mix of shock and hungry opportunism. Chikadanaka realized that by becoming the perfectly annoying employee, she was forcing Chitara to look for a replacement who offered the quiet obedience she was now refusing to provide. She apologized profusely for the accidental deletion, her voice dripping with a fake sincerity that left Chitara boiling in a rage he was now too afraid to express out loud. The following Monday, Chikadanaka walked into the executive boardroom with a renewed sense of purpose, her colorful Ankara headgear tied with a precision that demanded attention. As the directors settled into their leather chairs, she did not wait for the usual interrogation from Mr. Chitara. Instead, she took the floor with a beaming smile that radiated a warmth no one in that room had ever seen her display toward the man. When she opened the quarterly report, she didn't lead with figures or logistics. She led with a glowing testimony of Chitara's mentorship. She spoke of his supposed patience and his visionary kindness, describing him as a leader who nurtured his staff like family. Mr. Chitara sat at the head of the table, his coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips. His eyes, usually sharp and ready to find a fault to exploit, were wide with stunned confusion. Chikadanaka continued her performance without a single stutter, thanking him in front of the board for his merciful guidance during the recent project delays. She painted a picture of a man who was a saint of corporate compassion, effectively wrapping him in a public reputation that was the polar opposite of his true nature. The directors nodded in approval, praising Chitara for his ability to inspire such deep loyalty and affection in his subordinates. Behind the mask of his professional smile, Chitara's face began to turn a deep, mottled purple. He was boiling with a rage that usually would have resulted in a roared insult or a slammed fist, but he was trapped. To snap at her now would be to admit that the kindest boss was a lie in front of the very people who controlled his tenure. He had to sit in agonizing silence, forced to nod and play along as Chikadanaka suffocated him with praise. She watched him closely, seeing the vein throbbing in his temple and realizing that her strategy was working perfectly. She was no longer the victim. She was the architect of his frustration, using his own ego as the bars of his cage. By the time the meeting ended, Chitara was exhausted from the effort of maintaining a mask he was too angry to wear, while Chikadanaka walked out with the lightness of a woman who had finally found the key to her own exit. The office atmosphere was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and the silent tension of a coming transition. Chikadanaka chose her moment carefully, finding Rosaline standing alone by the water cooler, adjusting her suit jacket with the practiced confidence of someone who already believed she belonged in the corner office. Instead of the usual cold professional distance, Chikadanaka approached with her shoulders slumped and her gaze fixed on the floor, the picture of a woman whose spirit had finally been crushed. She sighed heavily as she filled her cup, ensuring the sound was loud enough to draw Rosaline's sharp, predatory attention. In a voice that was barely a whisper, Chikitanaka began to speak as if she were confessing a deep, shameful secret. She told Rosaline that the pressure of working under a visionary like Mr. Chitara was becoming too much for her to bear. She admitted that while Chitara was a lion, a king who required a certain ferocity and fire from his second-in-command, she was starting to realize that she was simply a quiet worker who lacked the heat to match his greatness. She painted a picture of a man who was frustrated not because he was cruel, but because he was paired with a subordinate who was too weak to handle his power. Rosaline's eyes widened, her ears virtually twitching as she processed this supposed vulnerability. She did not see a trap, she saw a confession of defeat. To Rosaline, Chikitanaka was finally admitting that she was a wet rag holding back a powerful man's progress. Chikitanaka leaned in closer, telling Rosaline that a man of Chitara's stature deserved a home at the office filled with energy and a woman who could truly stand beside a king without trembling. Rosaline swallowed the bait whole, her mind already racing with how she would present her own fire to Mr. Chitara. She watched Chikitanaka walk away, convinced that the path to the throne was now wide open because the current queen was too tired to wear the crown. Little did she know that Chikitanaka was secretly counting the steps until her own exit, leaving the fire to someone else. The atmosphere in the executive suite was thick with a tension that felt like static electricity. Chikitanaka stood at the head of the conference table, her expression a mask of practiced incompetence as she opened the file for the most important presentation of the quarter. For weeks, she had been quietly laying the groundwork for this moment, ensuring that her usual meticulousness was replaced by a series of subtle, baffling errors. Mr. Chitara sat at the other end of the table, his fingers drumming a rhythmic, menacing beat against the glass surface. He had invited the senior partners specifically to show off his star manager, but the screen behind her told a different story. The slides were a disaster. Numbers were misaligned, graphs led to nowhere, and the primary data for the merger was missing entirely. It was a burnt presentation, charred by intentional neglect. As Chikitanaka feigned a panicked search through her laptop, she caught a glimpse of Rosaline sitting in the corner. Rosaline was leaning forward, her eyes bright with a predatory hunger, clutching a flash drive that Chikitanaka knew contained the correct version of the files. Rosaline had spent the morning whispering to Chitara about Chikitanaka's declining mental state, positioning herself as the only one capable of saving the day. The silence in the room was finally broken by the sound of Mr. Chitara's chair screeching against the floor. His face was a deep, mottled purple, the mask of the visionary leader disintegrating in front of the partners. He did not care about the audience. His ego had been bruised beyond repair. He slammed his fist onto the table, the decorative water glasses rattling in their coasters. He roared with a voice that shook the glass partitions, a sound that reached every ear in the open-plan office outside. He told her she was a disgrace, a common failure he had wasted years trying to polish. "Pack your things," he bellowed, the words echoing like a gunshot through the hallway. "I want you out of this building before the sun sets. You are finished." Chikitanaka dropped her head, hiding the flash of absolute relief in her eyes, as the public execution she had carefully choreographed finally reached its peak. Chikitanaka stood in the center of the open-plan office, the air vibrating with the echo of Mr. Chitara's final, thunderous roar. He had just declared her fired in front of every junior staffer and department head, his face contorted in a mask of righteous fury. This was the moment Chikitanaka had meticulously engineered over months of burnt spreadsheets and strategic silence. Yet as she looked at him, she knew the exit required one final masterful act. She did not walk away with the cold dignity of a woman who had already secured a secret severance package and a new beginning. Instead, she let her knees buckle, collapsing onto the plush carpet as if her entire world had just disintegrated. She began to wail, a sound so raw and desperate that it reached the furthest corners of the floor. She clutched at Mr. Chitara's polished leather shoes, her voice trembling as she begged for her career crown to be returned. She played the part of the industry orphan perfectly, reminding him, and the audience of shocked co-workers, how he had rescued her from the dust. She wept about her loyalty and the years she had given to the firm, her tears smudging the expensive foundation she had worn specifically to look haggard and broken. Watching her from the doorway of the executive suite, Mr. Chitara felt a surge of intoxicating power. Seeing this star reduced to a sobbing mess at his feet made him feel like a god among men. He puffed out his chest, his ego swelling to fill the room as he looked down at her with a sneer of ultimate superiority. He believed he had finally broken her spirit, proving once and for all that she was nothing without his light. But as Chikadinaka buried her face in her hands, her wailing muffled by the fabric of her skirt, she felt the weight of the flash drive hidden in her hem, the one containing the evidence of her exit strategy and the contacts he thought he controlled. Behind the mask of a shattered woman, a cold, sharp clarity took hold. She was not mourning a job. She was performing a burial for the monster he had become. Every sob she forced out was a brick in the wall she was building between her past and her future. By the time he stepped back and ordered security to escort her out, Chikadinaka knew she had won. She had given him the hollow victory he craved, leaving him with a bloated ego and a successor who had no idea she was stepping into an electric chair. The atmosphere in the lobby was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the unspoken tension of a changing guard. Chikadinaka stood by the polished silver elevator doors, her small cardboard box of personal belongings held firmly in her arms. She had just finished her final performance in Mr. Chitara's office, a dramatic display of heartbreak and pleading that had left him feeling like an absolute king for casting her out. As the light above the elevator chimed, the doors slid open to reveal Rosaline, dressed in a shimmering high-end power suit that she had likely bought on credit to mark her first day as the new operations manager. Rosaline stepped out with a triumphant, wicked smirk, her eyes scanning Chikadinaka's modest box with obvious disdain. She blocked the path for a moment, enjoying the sight of the woman she had finally displaced. With a mocking tilt of her head, Rosaline whispered that some chairs were meant for queens and not for those who couldn't handle the heat. She told Chikadinaka to go back to the shadows of the industry while she took over the empire, even promising to send her the leftovers from her first celebratory lunch. Chikadinaka did not flinch. Instead, the look of a defeated employee vanished from her face, replaced by a terrifyingly calm clarity. She leaned into Rosaline's ear, her voice as soft as a passing breeze. She told Rosaline that she wasn't angry, but truly grateful. She acknowledged that Rosaline wanted the title, the corner office, and the prestige of working beside Mr. Chitara. Chikadinaka whispered that Rosaline now had it all, every single bit of the man's temper, his midnight demands, and his demonic rages. She urged Rosaline never to say she didn't receive a gift. As Rosaline's smile flickered with a second of confusion, her greed quickly pushed the doubt away, and she marched toward the executive suite like a conqueror. Chikadinaka stepped into the elevator, pressed the button for the ground floor, and as the doors closed, she let out a breath she had been holding for years.